On this episode of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle, we discuss the latest news, primary source CRNA verification, nurse call systems, and discuss employee record keeping and professional employer organizations, or PEOs, and interview Mike Ross, Director, Innovation and Development at Insperity, about 9 proven strategies to have your business run better, grow faster, and make more money.
Welcome to the ASC Podcast with John Goehle, the longest-running podcast specifically focused on the freestanding ambulatory surgery industry. We would like to thank our sponsors, Surgical Information Systems, providing cutting-edge information solutions for surgery providers. Trivalence. Trivalence offers a comprehensive next-generation ASC solution that optimizes payment and supply chain performance, enabling actionable data insights. And Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies, the nation's leading regulatory and accreditation compliance resource for ambulatory surgery centers. For more information about our sponsors, please visit our website at ascpodcast.com.
Welcome to episode 164 of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle for August 22nd, 2022, recording from our studio in Spencerport, New York. This is Sue Cronkite, Chief Researcher for the ASC Podcast with John Goehle and Senior Nurse Consultant for Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies. The ASC regulatory environment is extremely dynamic, and the material provided in this episode is based on information available as of the date of the recording. Joining me is John Goehle, the owner of Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies. He is recognized as one of the nation's leading experts in the ambulatory industry. Mr. Goehle is the author of over 10 books on the ASC industry and a frequent industry speaker on regulatory, accreditation, and finance issues. So and he's kind of sad right now because the last of our puppies are going home at the end of this week.
I know.
We're down to 2 from the 8.
We have puppy time. Just before we came down to record here, I went in to spend some time with the puppies. And, of course, things have to be done according to their schedule. And they kind of were they're saying, we want to sleep right now. So, I also did want to point out that this is our third take, and that you actually mispronounced my name on the last take.
I almost said Goehle. We're a little out of practice. We're a little frazzled right now. A lot of stuff going on.
So it's pretty busy. But our last of our puppies are going home, and I know we talk an awful lot about the puppies here, and that is one of the reasons we're falling behind in some of these episodes again. But we do hope to have another litter in December, so figure December will be a little bit behind also.
Yeah.
We have some great news, though. We welcome Donna Macchio, who is our newest employee at Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies. She's formerly the administrator at Ambulatory Surgery Center in Westchester, and she's been a dear friend of mine for many years. We don't want to admit how long we've been friends because that would put age out there, and she's actually been interviewed on the podcast during some of our state conferences, and we expect that we'll have her here again soon. She's got some great advice, and she'll probably be participating a little bit in some of our boot camps coming up. So
she's a captive audience now, and she joined us for our Monday meeting for the first time this week. She did not run away, as far as I know.
Well, I think I cut her off. I didn't allow her to send any emails to us.
Yes.
Yet, but,
so I think, and she's going to be such a great addition. The experience that she's got, it's just perfect. And I think she'll be a great mentor for a lot of her clients.
Absolutely. And we're very excited. And speaking of mentoring, we have our next boot camp coming up. The ASC Administrators Boot Camp begins next Tuesday, August 30th, and goes from August 30th through September 2nd, 2022. As with all of our conference, it's going to be presented virtually, and we still have some slots open. It is pretty close to capacity right now, but we still have a couple slots open, and we might even open up more if we have to, because I think we've been able to prove that we can handle a pretty good crowd there. But it is still very personal, and we're very excited about. I think this is going to be our 5th administrators boot camp, Sue, and we have over 130 graduates of all of our programs. So we're excited. We are going to be announcing very shortly the Director of Nursing boot camp, which will be in October. And we do have some other news too. Is that Christina Benton and I have come to an agreement on putting together a business office manager boot camp. Now, that will not be for another year. That's probably going to be sometime during either the summer or the fall of 2023. But it's a great opportunity. So that really gives us the full gamut of boot camps. We'll have obviously the administrator, the director of nursing, and now sometime later 2023 we're going to have a business office manager boot camp. So very excited about those developments. And also, September is going to be a busy month. September, we have, in conjunction with Christina Benton and Coding Compliance Management, the September 2022 ASC Finance, Accounting, and Reimbursement Seminar. And that's going to be on September 15th and 16th. And that's also going to be presented virtually. And that's a great opportunity to learn everything you need to learn about finance, accounting, and reimbursement and coding, especially great for nurses who want to learn more about something you didn't get to, right, when you went to nursing school at all. And you might not actually want to learn more about it, but of course it is one of those things that as administrators and even directors of nursing, you really have to understand. And of course, if you want to pass the CASC exam, you're going to have some background in it too. And that's one of the goals we have. It will be getting AEU credits and coding credits. We're still working on that right now, and we should have that announced by the time the conference comes off. Sue, we often talk about what makes our virtual conferences so different. And it came to me last week. I was recording for another organization a webinar. It's a pre-recorded webinar for this conference. And, I still enjoy doing it. But the problem with it is there's no audience there. There's no feedback. And all I feel here is myself talking, which is what makes us so different, I think, with our virtual conferences.
People can ask. You can really make it as personalized as you want to. You can type in questions. You can raise your hand and ask questions. During the lunch breaks, we always allow you to, come in and either show yourself on Zoom or just speak to everybody, and that part's not recorded or not kept in the recording. So, you've really got a great opportunity to customize it the way you want. And sometimes people will bring things up and we realize, we didn't cover that.
That's right.
And other people might be interested. And then that brings up a whole other subject. So it's great. And John, you really enjoy getting that feedback because then you know how to customize to what people need to know, or if there's any new issues have come up in the last few days near the conference, we can always address that. Well,
I think the other thing that I really enjoy is that it's not a it's not a one-way conversation, but it's also, during the pandemic, when we started doing these virtual conferences, we found it was going to be very important that if we're going to do this, we have to do it differently. And one of the things that we do differently is that while we'll always have a main speaker, you're also going to have other speakers. So, for example, when I'm speaking, I do a lot of the speaking during the administrators boot camp. Lori's on, sometimes Ann Geyer's on. Of course, you are on moderating things. And it's always great to have, a little bit of an interruption of those voices every once in a while. You can't get into a monotone attitude there. And you really have an opportunity to play off of each other. Somebody, I might forget to say something, about a particular topic as I'm going through it, or Lori, when she's going through hers, I'll want to add something to her content.
Yeah, well, everybody has different strengths, so you can get all different sides of a subject.
And it's not scripted. We have the slides, but nothing is scripted there. It's very interactive. And I would say I think it's very entertaining. I think
if you do say so yourself.
If I do say so myself,
amusing.
That's right. Yes. And we do, as Sue said, we encourage the questions live. And we don't pretend to be polished with these conferences. It's much like attending a live conference. Sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes dogs make sudden appearances. Sometimes puppies might be there. I don't think we'll have a puppy. Well, we might be able to borrow a puppy for a short period of time. And we always get a lot of positive feedback. So if you're interested in any more information about our upcoming boot camps or the Finance and Accounting Seminar, go to ascpodcast.com.
And a whole other benefit is our Saturday sessions, so that when you get finished with this conference, if other questions come up, or even whatever, a couple months later,
Yeah.
you can always join us on our sessions. We pretty much do them on Saturday mornings right now.
Right.
But John is always on. Lori's almost always on. Ann is very often on. So you've got, at least 3 surveyors. Sometimes Jim with life safety will join us.
This last week, we had 4 surveyors on. Quite an event. And think
ask
about
any
that.
questions. And there tends to be maybe 3-4 people at different times. So you really can ask a question without feeling like you're announcing your issues with your center to the world. And, and they give feedback too. So it's kind of like a peer to peer as well as having, experts in the field. So that's really great.
I really enjoy those. And there are, you don't have to only attend the boot camps to attend those. That is an advantage of being one of our podcast members, through the ASC Central. Yeah. So again, all that information is available at ascpodcast.com. So we do have some recent news. Sue, why don't you go through some of the stuff that's going on in the industry?
Yep. So I saw in Politico on 8/17 that the CDC is planning a major overhaul that's intended to rebuild its reputation following the COVID pandemic. As most people are aware, there was a lot of bad feedback about how that was handled. And they've been criticized for their handling also of the emerging monkeypox outbreak. So in a recent review of the CDC, it was noted, and I'm going to quote this, traditional scientific and communication processes were just not adequate to effectively respond to a crisis the size and scope of the COVID-19 pandemic. This was according to an agency statement. And some recommendations are to work more effectively with other agencies, community agencies, public health agencies, release information more quickly and in an easy-to-understand language to improve transparency and public trust, because I really think a lot of people, especially if you don't know a lot about science, it's really hard to understand why things kept changing or recommendations kept changing. Yeah. And sometimes were they just trying to get you to do what they wanted? It wasn't based in science. So the more they can be really, really clear and listen, this is what we know now, might change, I think it'll really help to build some trust.
Well, so, you make a very good point there, too, is that it was important. The general public probably doesn't understand that things are going to evolve. The advice that we give in January might be different than the advice we have in March. Yeah. But you need to explain that the reason for that is new information and where that new information came from. And I don't think they did a good job of doing
No, it almost seemed like, people aren't following our recommendations, so we're going to change it, but was it based in fact or wasn't it? That kind of thing. So they plan to make changes to their website as well to make it easier to navigate and easier to access simplified public health recommendations, and to change the focus of staff from publishing research in scientific journals to actually concentrating more on research that is aimed at public health policy and at actual action items. So more focusing on that public health part of it instead of just that higher level science that really, shouldn't be their main focus necessarily. So
I hope that we can get some trust back. I think the World Health Organization also lost some credibility during this whole process, and both the CDC and WHO. There are a lot of great advantages to having those resources available, and it's too bad that this pandemic left a bad taste in the mouths of many people out there who don't understand what's going on or don't understand the process.
And part of it could be what we tell our centers about, with patient satisfaction is managing expectations. So, don't put out the science as this is the absolute thing. This is what we know. Explain that this is what we know right now. Right. This is our best guess of how to deal with it. And okay, now we know something different, and just be more open and transparent, and hopefully it will help.
Yeah. And a big example of that is that they said right from the very beginning, at the very beginning of the vaccine, that if you get the vaccine, you're not going to get coronavirus or COVID. And, of course, that turned out to not be true. And, of course, that was widely spread and resulted in a lot of the confusion that we had later on and the mistrust.
Yeah, and because I think so much of the research maybe could have been done by drug companies, which I think,
absolutely.
So being honest about where you're getting the information and all of that. So... And more.
I was going to say,
more
and still
COVID.
Talking about it. We'll be, when you and I are retiring in about 10 years, we'll still be talking about this. Hopefully not.
Hopefully the monkeypox will be gone by then. So the August 18th OR manager referred to a study done by Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in which they looked at 210 employees and patients who had serological evidence of a recent Omicron infection. And they found that 56% of them were unaware that they even had COVID. 10% of the 56%, it was like 12 out of the 210, I think it was, had some mild symptoms, but attributed it to a cold or some other issue. But that means, the majority of that 56% didn't have any type of symptoms. Yeah. So they're just noting that also that healthcare workers were more likely to be aware of their infection status just because they're probably more on high alert and they know what to expect if they do have any symptoms. But the awareness overall was still very low, and so this is likely contributing to the continued rapid spread of the virus because I think a lot more people have it than realize.
Sue, you were talking about the weekly drop-in sessions on Saturdays, and a couple things came up this last one that we'll just talk about briefly for our section on recent experiences. So, during every episode, we try to talk about some of the recent experiences that we've had or some of our clients have had, et cetera. And one thing that came up again, and I have spoken about this several times, like during the boot camps or during the credentialing seminar, that there are some surveyors that do not really understand primary source verification for CRNAs. And I'm sorry if some of you that are listening to us are surveyors, but this has just popped up a couple times. I thought it had been fixed, but apparently it doesn't. So recently, one of the centers that we were in communication with was cited because they had verified primary source verified education and training of CRNAs at the NBCRNA.com website. And the surveyor cited them for not doing primary source verification. So what actually happens is when you click, when you go to the NBCRNA.com website, there is a button, I don't know what to call it, just a link up at the very top that says Verify Credential. And if you click on that, you go to a credential search tool. And it actually says right on that page that you go into that this serves as primary source verification from the NBCRNA for certification and recertification information. And it continues to state that for public and patient safety, the NBCRNA provides a platform to verify certification for any nurse anesthetist. So, as I said, some surveyors have cited ASCs for using this tool, saying that the report that comes off when you enter the person's name and press enter actually does not indicate that it was primary source verification. Therefore, this is what I suggest. Print the page that I just referenced to, that is actually the search tool, which states that this is primary source verification, and attach it to the verification page that you get after you enter the person's name. So again, print the page from the website that says that they're doing primary source verification, and then attach it to the back of the actual verification page that you get out of it, and that way you can prove this. Since I started telling people about this, I have never had any of our clients cited for this, and this is what I've also recommended when I'm surveying places, that this is a good way to do it. Yeah. But it's been kind of disappointing to me that sometimes surveyors don't know this. And I know that while almost all surveyors really do understand this by now, if you are a surveyor and you're listening and you're not familiar with the verification process for CRNAs, you might want to visit the NBCRNA.com website for more information about that. And then, Sue, also on Saturday, there was a big discussion about nurse call systems. I think I'm trying to remember exactly what started it, but I think one of our listeners said that their system was not working.
They couldn't hear.
Oh, they couldn't hear it.
Outside of if they called from the OR, the PACU and pre-op could not hear the emergency
the button
call.
Going off, which seems it's kind of useless. The only place that you can hear a call is in the room where that call was done. It doesn't work. Yeah. So it did start us in a whole conversation about whether these are required, what they're required. And I just want to give some references. If you go to NFPA 99 Chapter 7.3.3, that is where it addresses call systems. And I can't go into all the detail here, but NFPA 99 Chapter 7 does require operating rooms to be able to call outside the ORs. And FPA actually states that a staff emergency assistance call system needs to be available to summon additional assistance for each operating, delivery, recovery, emergency, examination, treatment, and intermediate care area, critical care units, nursery, special procedure rooms, cardiac cath rooms, stress test areas. I'm reading directly from this. Triage, outpatient surgery, admission and discharge areas, and areas for psychiatric patients, including seclusion and security rooms. Basically, there needs to be ability anywhere a patient's going to be able to summon somebody. It does go on to say that for emergency resuscitation alarm, the call system shall include provisions for an emergency code resuscitation alarm to summon assistance from outside the unit for critical care, pre-op, recovery, and emergency units. In other words, the operating rooms and the emergency care areas. 7.3.3.1.9 says, in areas where patients are under constant visual surveillance, such as, like we know, the pre-op or the recovery areas, the nurse call system shall be permitted to be limited to staff emergency assistance call and the emergency resuscitation alarm. Two-way communication from the patient bed location isn't required in that situation. And an interesting question came up is that, can you build a system, Sue? Remember they said, one of our persons said, can we build a system that it notifies people using wireless devices like a walkie-talkie? I'd call it a walkie-talkie. I don't know what you call it.
Two-way radio.
7.3.3.1.1.2 does say supplemental features shall be permitted to include call initiation to alphanumeric pagers and other wireless devices carried by healthcare facility personnel. And you just said it. I talked over you, though. I think you said
two-way radio.
Two-way radio. There you go.
It does worry me. You have to make sure that your staff is going to carry them. They're not going to be sitting on a desk somewhere.
But they're very effective. We actually have them in the house here for, emergencies. Do you know that we have them in the house here?
See, these things are not useful if everybody doesn't know where they are. Or
we're going to do a drill that's in the house. Rosie will to run the drill for us here.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a short break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about employee file documentation, professional employer organizations, PEOs. And Ross going to have an interview with Mike Ross, Director of Innovation and Development at Insperity. The ASC Podcast with John Goehle and our virtual conferences would not be possible without the support of our sponsors and patrons. Our goal with this podcast is to help busy ASC executives and staff to keep up with the latest news, learn how to remain compliant with regulations and accreditation standards, and to provide opportunities for ASC leaders to advance in their careers. All of this, of course, costs money, and without our sponsor partners and our patrons, we would not be able to provide this service. Surgical Information Systems was an early sponsor that leads the industry with their software solutions. SIS's mission is to deliver solutions and services that help surgery providers, regardless of care setting, improve their organization so they can deliver the highest level of care to their patients. For more information, visit their website at sisfirst.com. Our newest sponsor is Trivalence. The Trivalence solution is focused on removing waste from the healthcare payments ecosystem by creating the next generation, data-driven supply chain automation and payment optimization portal and infrastructure, saving countless hours, administrative costs, and allowing for scale. For more information, visit trivalence.com. That's TRIVALENCE.com. Our oldest sponsor, Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies, is the nation's leader in outsourced regulatory and accreditation oversight. Busy administrators, nurse managers, and medical directors simply don't have the time to keep up with the constantly changing regulatory environment and the requirements of the conditions for coverage and accreditation organizations. AHS helps you to remain compliant for a reasonable fixed monthly fee so you and your staff can focus on taking care of your patients. For more information, visit ah-strategies.com. And last but certainly not least, our patrons. For a reasonable monthly cost, our patrons support the podcast while receiving access to a database of important information, such as policies, forums, drills, and education programs, as well as the ability to meet weekly via Zoom with each other and the staff of the ASC Podcast. Visit ascpodcast.com for more information. So, Sue, I thought it would be a good time to talk about employee files again and just employee maintenance. It's one of those things that we talk about during our boot camps, and it always generates a lot of questions. I think it's fair to say that not many of us get a lot of training in employee management or benefits management or human resource management, and there's a lot to learn about it. And we're certainly not the world's biggest experts on it, but at least we know what needs to be into a file. That really behooves you to hire a good lawyer, have access to a human resources department. We in our company even have a human resources department, which is composed of one person, but at least we have one person that's dedicated to it. Unfortunately, that person does tend to turn over quite a bit. That's just the nature of the business right now with everything. So I thought we would focus on three things today. One would be just talk about what needs to be in an employee file, because those are the things that surveyors look for when you have a survey. Second is talk about PEOs, professional employer organizations, which provide an opportunity for a different way of managing your staff. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And then we're going to finish with a neat interview that we did with one of the PEOs. And he's actually going to talk about how you can find strategies working with your employees to help your business run better, faster, and make more money. Let's start with the documentation. So when a surveyor comes in, they're going to want to look at your employee file, and it's going to have a number of items, and we'll just go through them. Sue, why don't you start?
Sure. So you'll need employment-related items as required by your organization's personnel policies, which is a job application, a resume, job description, verification of references, results of a background check, and employee benefit forms.
So let's talk about that for a second. So a job application isn't always necessary, but you do want to have an employee sign off on the fact that they provided accurate information, that they don't have a criminal background, for example. Same thing with a resume. You don't necessarily need one, but how are you going to be able to prove that this individual has the requisite training and education to be able to carry out their job? So that job application and those verification of that information has to be signed. Also, you must have in your file a job description, which is current and up to date for all of the jobs that person might have. So let's say you have a nurse manager, for example, who also works on the floor. They might have to have a job description for being the nurse manager, maybe one for being the infection control coordinator, and another one for being a preoperative nurse, for example, whatever that is.
We had a citation with one of our centers because the receptionist was doing the COVID screening, just taking temperatures. Yeah. And they asked, where's the job description for temperature taker, basically.
Right. Or it didn't even have that included in the...
because it's just something that came up suddenly, and they decided that's who was going to do it. But, so you always have to be on top of changing that if their duties change.
Right. Verification of references. If you get references from your employees, you should be doing the verification of those references. You might be surprised at what you find out sometimes when you actually do check references. Background checks are not always required, but if your policy says they are required, you have to do it. Or if your state requires you to do it, or if your accreditation organization requires you to do it, you have to do it. And then you need to have in your file all of those employee benefit forms also. And then if the individual is licensed or certified, licensing would be, for example, if you're a registered nurse, or certification if you're sterile processing tech, for example, and they have certification, you're going to want to have verification of that, usually from the website for that organization or from your state's website for professional licenses. You can't just have a copy of their license or their certification. You're going to want to have proof that you've actually verified with the organization that this individual does have a valid license or certification. And you also need to have a process for monitoring any items that expire, such as those licenses or their certifications. And, of course, if they have ACLS or BLS or any of those other types of certifications, you want to make sure that you're on top of that. While we're on that subject, Sue, issue has come up. We might have mentioned this before. When you have ACLS or BLS, you need to make sure that that individual who went through that training has gone through a hands-on version of it. You can't just do an online version. That's something surveyors are catching on to very quickly now.
Well, it came up during the pandemic because for a very short time, you just couldn't get something hands-on, and people just kind of went with that and thought they could do that, but it's really not valid. It has to be.
Right. I think they allowed it for a short period of time in 2020, but that's no longer valid.
Yeah. And you'll need periodic performance appraisals and current competencies.
Yeah, competencies, Sue, has become a big issue lately. Well, first of all, it's a really good thing to do anyway, just to make sure that your employees have the requisite training and experience in doing various things in your organization. So definitely have those done at least on an annual basis. And whatever your policy is for performance appraisals, not necessarily, unless your accreditation organization requires annual performance evaluations. You don't have to do it annually, but you need to follow whatever your policy is.
And it has to be specific to what their job duties are. We had seen one center that it seemed to be more based on personality or how they got along with people, and that could be a part of it, but you have to make sure you're actually checking their clinical responsibilities if they're in a clinical role.
That's right.
And the competencies, just remember it's the same thing with any type of care that you're giving or anything. You have to document it. A lot of times people are getting those in-services and the competencies and that kind of thing, but then maybe they're not being documented or kept in their file. And it's important that they're easy to find and they're right there for the surveyors to see.
So, Sue, while we're on this subject, something's come up recently. A number of centers have been talking about using or are using temp agencies to staff things like their nursing function. I mean, we all know what a serious situation we have right now with regard to being able to find staff. And it's important to note that even if you hire a temp from a temp agency, you, the ASC, still has to verify their credentials. You have full information with regard to their health. They still have to go through a training program, a comprehensive training program about all of your policies and procedures, emergency processes, et cetera. And you need to do competencies on those individuals. I've heard people say, well, I don't have to do any of that because the temp agency did that. Well, it's not going to fly. And you can get into serious trouble.
And can the temp agency do things like bloodborne pathogens? Can they give you proof that they've done those more general educational things?
Yeah, that's actually a very good point, is that those things that are not specific to your organization, as long as you have proof that the person had been trained in it, you can bypass that. But when it comes to all of the things that are specific to your organization, your policies and procedures, your infection control program, your emergency plan, I mean, there's so many things. You know, it's not something that can be done in 15 minutes. They're going to have to go through quite a bit of training, and that's what really makes the use of temp agencies very difficult. So keep an eye out for that if you have been using temps in your organization. You also have to have evidence that the employee handbook or the personnel policies were provided to the employee, and usually when they were hired, and usually you want to have them sign off on a document that indicates that they have done that. And of course, the Dear I-9 immigration form, have that completed. Often, Sue, I see a copy of the I-9 in a file, but it's not completed or not completed properly. Or a big thing I've been finding lately is that the I-9 that they're using was expired at the time that they filled it out. So be very careful about that. That's another thing that you can get cited for.
And you'll need proof of initial orientation and training. It usually should be within 30 days of hire. We often recommend as soon as possible because something could happen within 2 days that they're there. And that would include fire safety and the disaster preparedness plan, the infection prevention and control program, bloodborne pathogen and other OSHA training, risk management program, including training in the reporting of adverse incidents. Then the documentation of annual training is present after the hire date, and the use of emergency safety and fire extinguishing equipment. And often it's really hands-on. You have to show them where your fire extinguisher is and make sure, a lot of people just they're not comfortable with using it, so you've got to go through all that. The safety program, including exposure control training and Sharps injury prevention and confidentiality and privacy training, HIPAA in other words.
And then, of course, you have to have documentation of in-service training as needed if there's new equipment that you're using, if you're starting a new service, if you've identified some weaknesses, such as in your Sharp safety program or in your hand hygiene, you're going to want to show proof of in-service training on that. And that type of information should be in the file of the employee. And then health information has to also be kept. And this often varies by state. Different states have different requirements for exactly what type of health documentation must be kept. And it should be kept in a separate file, not within the main employee file. That would include a number of things, such as
employee acceptance or declination of immunizations, based on state and or organization policy when they're applicable, and work injuries and illnesses, if any, are documented.
So managing employees is a difficult task for any small business that can't afford a human resource department. And let's face it, most of our ambulatory surgery centers, especially those smaller ones, really do not have a dedicated human resource person, which means that the people that are listening to this podcast are probably the human resource department. And it's becoming more and more challenging. I think during the pandemic, it became really apparent when we had to put employees on, lay them off for a period of time or let them go for a period of time, and then not everybody came back, and then you're hiring and firing and all of those things that go with managing your staff is always a pretty challenging job. And that has resulted in the growth of an organization called a Professional Employer Organization, or a PEO. And that provides a possible alternative to make your jobs easier. Now, I'm not here to advocate and say that this is a good or bad thing to do. I've found that a number of our clients are using it, so I just thought it might be wise for us to just speak about it a little bit. And then I just happened to interview a individual that works for a PEO, and we'll have that interview in a few minutes. But so that's what kind of prompted this whole conversation. So Wikipedia, the great resource nowadays for information like this, defines a PEO as follows, and this is quoting right from Wikipedia. A professional employer organization, or a PEO, is an outsourcing firm that provides services to small and medium-sized businesses. Typically, the PEO offering may include human resource consulting, safety and risk mitigation services, payroll processing, employer payroll tax filing, workers' compensation insurance, health benefits, employers' practice and liability insurance like EPLI, retirement programs such as a 401k plan, regulatory compliance assistance in the human resource area, workforce management technology and training and development. And so what happens is the PEO enters into a contractual co-employment agreement. In other words, the employees are employees of the PEO and of your surgery center. So they have a co-employment agreement with its clientele. And through co-employment, the PEO becomes the employer of record for tax purposes through filing payroll taxes under its own tax identification numbers. As the legal employer, the PEO is responsible for withholding proper taxes, paying unemployment insurance taxes, and providing workers' compensation coverage. So it is a way of definitely making things a lot easier in your organization, and something you might want to look into more. So during the June New Jersey ASC Association annual meeting, I did have an opportunity to sit down with Mike Ross, who is the Director of Innovation and Development at Insperity, which is a PEO, about 9 proven strategies to have your business run better, grow faster, and make more money. As you can imagine, since Mike works for a PEO, he focused a lot on human element of growing and improving your business. In other words, what you can do in order to keep your employees happy, how your employees can help you accomplish the goals that you have set forth for your organization. So let's listen to that interview. So this is John Goehle here at the New Jersey Association meeting in June of 2020, and I'm here with Mike Ross with Insperity. Mike just finished a presentation on human resources. I'm going to let him talk a little bit about his presentation and just some observation about what's going on in human resources. And Insperity is a PEO. You're going to have to remind me, what does PEO stand for?
Professional Employer.
There, thank you.
Yeah. No, you're good.
I forgot about it. So, this is a tough time right now with human resources, and it's been very, staffing has been difficult, managing the human resources department. Of course, all of the legal issues that have surrounded COVID, and even before COVID. I mean, COVID isn't the only driving factor or driving problem that we have in the human resources side. So tell me a little bit about your presentation and, what your focus was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, even before jumping in, I'll just build off of that last comment that you made. We have seen, in the HR industry, it's what we study it, we eat and drink it, right? And what we have seen is that these last couple of years have really helped. I guess in one way, it's helped us educate those about HR, but it has really shown a positive light, right? HR used to just be seen as, we're the compliance people. We're going to come in, we're going to make sure you do your annual training, you're going to sign here, you're going to sign here, we're going to update the employee handbook as needed, and we'll throw the corporate picnic once a year.
Yeah, right.
That was kind of what everyone thought HR was. And it really has been a tough couple of years. Just with, how do we lead people? How do we motivate people? If we're sending people home and they're no longer in the office and they're working remote, how do we know they're being productive? Or how do we instill our culture remotely? And it's different by industry. Some industries, they laugh. They said, well, you sent people home? We couldn't. We aren't a business that functions that way. Or we are a business that 50% could work from home, or just office staff could work from home, but others had to be in present. And so, it's been very interesting to see what challenges businesses have, but it's been very clear every business has been challenged. And they've all kind of come back to, our leadership skills aren't what we thought they were. Our systems aren't what we thought they were. And just our confidence in making sure we're taking care of our people isn't as good as we thought it was. And so that is a lot of what we talked about today. My presentation focused, we pulled content from a book that our CEO wrote called Take Care of Your People. And in there he outlines 9 core strategies, proven strategies for helping to run your business, helping to maximize your people, streamline your processes, and minimize your risk. And so I pulled those strategies out, and that's what we talked about today. But then I also, in there, he has a bonus strategy, a 10th strategy, which is faith and optimism at work. And so we talked about that as well. What does it mean to have that faith and optimism? And a lot of that might be more of a leadership trait. How are you leading? How are you envisioning your company? How are you inspiring your employees? But I think it also comes down to the employees. Do they believe in themselves, and do they believe in their employees, right? Do your internal leaders at all levels believe in their employees? And so that was, a lot of what we talked about today.
Well, I think leadership is a big issue. We've been talking about a lot on the podcast, and of course, some of our virtual conferences lately have been focusing on building leadership skills for administrators and for the nurse managers. And you pointed that out very well. Is that it really brought to the forefront the importance of that, of motivating people. We're no longer in the mode where we can just treat our employees as commodities. We have to keep them happy. We have to keep them from leaving because there's so many other opportunities for them.
And one of the big trends that we're seeing now too is it's hard to find employees. And that's nationwide. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's
not just nurses now.
Right. It's agnostic to the industries. Right? So those that have always been challenged by that are saying, welcome to our world. But then even they're seeing an elevated area of challenge. But a trend that we're seeing is that a lot of individuals or a lot of organizations have found that they will promote up because it's easier to hire in at lower levels. And that comes with a lot of being intentional. If you just promote people up because, you were here the longest, then you may be setting that employee up for failure. I talked earlier today about the Peter principle, and it's a business principle that says you will promote people to their level of incompetence, right? You're doing well at this role, I'm going to promote you. You're doing well at that role, I'll promote you. And as soon as you're just doing mediocre, I stop promoting you. Well, what happens then is you fill your organization with what many believe is just mediocre employees. You don't have mediocre employees. You have amazing employees that are mediocre at the role they're in. So what can you do as an organization to develop them, to upskill them, to prepare them for that next role, or get them in the role where they really feel that they can be successful and that you can get that full value and potential out of them.
It's so funny you should bring that up. At 1:30, I'm doing a session on succession planning, which is exactly that whole conversation.
Yes.
How do you prepare? How do you and your point is extremely important, right? The importance of identifying people, moving them through your ranks, mentoring them, providing them resources, sending them to the appropriate training, so that the Peter principle doesn't kick in. In other words, don't assume that they're going to be able to learn that on their own, that they're given those skills. So you talk about the 9...
the 9 core strategies. So let me, I'll go real quick and just say what the 9 are, and then that way, if there's one we could dive into.
Sure.
So the first one was getting your culture right, and it's really focusing on, who we are, and we warn people, you're going to have a culture. It's better to have one by design than by default. And if you're not being purposeful and designing it, it's going to just create one, and you will have, there will never be a void of culture. There will be a culture. we always say, go back to those core values. Your culture needs to represent your values, and your values need to really drive the organization, so that when tough times come, you can go back to those values and not just, as I called it earlier today, flavor of the month. Hey, we've got a new this, let's try it. Hey, we've got a new that, let's try it.
It comes down to strategic planning. By the way, that's another thing I do a lot of speeches on is strategic planning. It's just so funny that that so much of what we have been talking about here really fits into the whole message about how we treat our personnel.
Absolutely. And that was, all of these strategies come from this, our story. It's the Insperity story, and it's not the Insperity sales pitch. It's the Insperity story. I'm a terrible Insperity sales rep. I don't know our product well enough to be able to sell it. But what I do know is the Insperity story, and that is that at every inflection point our business had, we pulled back to our core and said, how do we as Insperity address this challenge? And then we would move forward. And if that meant adopting new processes and solutions and services, we would do that. But if it meant scrapping and moving a completely different direction, we would do that. We would continue to reinvent ourselves. And that's where we identified these, and that's the Insperity way. We will continue to reinvent ourselves, and that's what we challenge any business is, don't get stagnant. Look at how you can reinvent yourselves. Look at how you can get the most out of your people.
And of course, in an ASC, the quality improvement process is ideal for that type. I mean, there's actually a built-in and regulatorily required process that you can call upon to be able to do exactly what you're talking about.
And I love that. And that was some of the stuff that I think really resonated from my discussion earlier today was our CEO, Paul Sarvati, always says, I love bringing in new people to the organization because with every new hire, we have just improved and changed the trajectory and the potential of our organization. And it's so true. The people that you bring into your business, you're going out there and you're working hard to find the brightest, the smartest, the hardest working, the most motivated. They align with your culture. Don't just put them in a little box and only give them limited information or say, this is your job duty only, right? So that, as you were just talking, that whether it's required in the industry or not, it's just good business to get the most out of your people, to develop them and grow them, because they are the potential of your organization. It's only through the people that you have and how you treat them and how you grow them that you're really going to be able to take your organization to the next level and again and again.
I just wish we could get this message across to our owners and the physicians that don't, because, we're talking to the choir here, the people that listen to the podcast, and of course, the people that we're listening to yours, they totally understand it. But of course, getting that message across. But again, that's part of what you're trying to do here is, give the leaders in the organization that information they need in order to get the resources from them.
Strategy 2, I think we touched on it, was finding, hiring, and keeping the best. And so it's not just I work really hard to find the best, I pay them a lot and they stay. It's why are they staying? What makes them stay? Why are they leaving? What can we fix? How do we really improve that entire employee journey? And sometimes that journey may be, it's not a good fit. It's time for you to move on. But hopefully,
or making sure that you don't hire people just to fill because they're breathing and have a heartbeat.
Yes. And so, I think that plays into a lot of what we talked about. And then strategy 3, that focused on compensation, recognition, and rewards. And that's really just, what are we doing in our organization to reward people? What are we recognizing? Are they tied to our values? Are they tied to our business objectives? We often kind of put them in separate buckets. Are you a good performer? Here's your raise for the year. Are you a good performer? Here's a spot bonus, or here's an award at the company meeting. But are we aligning that program with where we're wanting to take the organization? Are we aligning that program with who we are? So that an employee knows I'm just as able to be recognized for living out the values of our company than I am for being a top performer. I said this earlier too, and I think it applies. Are you value-based? And the best way to know it is, if your values are only posted on the wall, you're probably not value-based. You need to be able to live those values in the hall. Right? Not just posted on the wall, but live them in the hall. Are you actually encouraging your employees to live in a way, to behave in a way that it's drawing them together, it's building them up because you're rewarding it, you're recognizing them? Number 5 was about employee performance improvement. I think we've kind of already touched on that, right? It's how you upskill them. It's how you manage that. You can't tell someone they're doing a good job or a bad job if you don't even have the basic fundamentals of HR in place. If you don't have job descriptions and handbooks, it's hard to tell someone they weren't doing their job.
Right. And updated and current and something that's looked at on a regular basis.
Absolutely. But even a job description, I think there's risk there to say we spent a whole year, we got all of our job descriptions, outlined and written and saved, and that process is in place. Well, that's the bare minimum.
That's exactly right.
That's the bare minimum. You want employees to go beyond that. Yeah. You want employees to give you an extra level of discretionary effort where they say, if you can build trust and implement trust, then I'm going to take my job description to the next level. I'm going to do beyond what you've asked me. And so I think it's critical when you think about employee improvement that sometimes it's the little things that get overlooked or taken advantage of. Well, I've got it in place, so that must be good enough. No, there might be more to that. There might be more to just having a job description. It's how do we then motivate them and inspire them and encourage them to go beyond just that description.
Sure.
Number 6 is employee administration and technology. This is just what tools do you have in place? How difficult is it for someone to enroll or update 401k or benefits, or I had a mid-season change to my dependents, or I moved. How do I update my address or my emergency contact information? And that used to be a differentiator.
Yeah.
There was a time when that kind of technology was, well, that company's got it going. They're and now it's an expected. It's a hygiene.
Right.
Wait, what do you mean you can't do that? Like, I could sit on hold at a call center and try and update that information or find out what doctors I can go to or what specialists. And so being mindful of those technologies, I think, is critical. I also like to take off the HR technology part on this and just say, what are your technologies in your organization? Do you have broken technologies? Do you have broken processes where your front line is saying to the new hire, oh, we don't do it that way, we do it this way. Oh, it doesn't work like that. And you have all these workarounds. That's exposing you to risks and liabilities when you start to do manual stuff. And one of the critical parts, and it's even one of the strategies, is liability and compliance. Yeah. And if you've got broken systems, you've got old technologies, you're putting yourself at risk, and you're also disengaging your employee because they're frustrated. Why do I have to use this tool day in and day out? I got all these manual processes. This isn't worth it. This is too much. And so, being really mindful of, is it time to spend a little bit of money internally and update some processes and some systems so that our people can get the most out of them?
Especially since there's so many options available out there right now to it. And I know that full well because we keep switching them. Which, by the way, hint to everybody else, don't keep switching your systems. But I think that's been the challenge over the last couple of years is there are a lot of different competitors out there. And as systems evolve, hopefully you find the one that's going to evolve with you. But it doesn't always work that way. But yeah, very good point.
Strategy 7 was human capital and mergers and acquisitions. And this one really focuses almost a message to the CEOs and leaders of these organizations to say, if that's your growth strategy, what are you doing to make sure that you're shored up in your organization, but also the companies that are your targets, that they're shored up? Because a lot of times we look at great sales results, we look at positive profit and loss statements and cash flows and say, numbers are all there. This is great. And what we don't realize is we've got disgruntled employees. Yeah. We've got EEOC claims that haven't been dealt with correctly. And so we may be buying ourselves into a lot of headaches in the next year or two. As well, is there a culture alignment? Yeah. Because you're about to take people that you really love, that love you, that are in your organization, that have dedicated years possibly to your company, and you're about to merge them with strangers. And what's the promotion process at that point? Whose values win? Are you adopting yours and pushing them into the new organization? Or are you taking new organizations and bringing them in? What is leadership structure? How do you decide who takes what role? And so there is a lot of, I think, overlooked opportunity on the HR side. When you're in this world, oftentimes it's, let's look at the business case. Let's look at the numbers. Let's look at, we're going to grow our regional geographic reach. We're going to grow our market share. We're going to grow, maybe we're purchasing into new services. We're expanding our offerings. And they miss, what is that going to do to the people? And if you are too disruptive to that process and don't have a good enough plan in place, you're going to miss out on all of those great numbers that your business case stated.
Well, and in the vernacular of an ASC, the average ASC, when we're talking about acquisitions, often our ASCs, the people that are listening to the podcast, they're being acquired by one of the bigger organizations. Yeah. And there's a real danger at that point of losing the people that you've had a long time, let alone, the bringing that corporate structure in there to oversee that.
Absolutely. And that's what I saw today, when I was presenting. When I kind of touched on that piece, there was a lot more heads that said, we're nodding to the getting acquired part versus the
acquiree,
being
acquirer.
The acquirer. And so absolutely. Yeah. And I think that leads us to nicely into strategy 8 was organization and leadership. Mm-hmm. We talked a little bit about this even before we turned the mics on today. Yeah. Your leadership really, really has a lasting impact on the organization. And if you're not a leadership group that's getting together and being purposeful and mindful about where you're taking the organization, right? Like we mentioned it. When you're looking at compensation, it's not just about paying the most, but it's what behaviors do we want to see our employees have? And how are we rewarding that? How are we building that into our compensation plans? Yeah. And so it really requires leaders to get away and work on the business, not just working in the business. And again, different industries, this may look different, right? It may be that in this area, your CEOs, more of the business side, they're on the business and not in it because it's not their specialty, and they leave the daily operations to those that have the specialties, the certifications, the trainings, the degrees. But I would then even challenge that level of leadership. Find a way of getting out and saying, how can I look at the business and fine-tune some of these things that are being expected from us from a business perspective that are getting that kind of muddied and convoluted in the actual daily operations.
Well, and that's a very important thing for our listeners. So many of our leaders in the surgery centers are being called in to actually cover for employees that you don't have right now, doing things that you used to have other employees doing. And you're so right, you get bogged down in that detail, that minutia. You got away from, you were promoted out of that, and now you're getting dragged into it, which means that you're losing that ability to look at the big picture and to think about future growth, which is it's eventually going to catch up with you.
And we actually, that was a great point, and we saw that trend go both directions when the pandemic hit. Because what we saw is a lot of those leaders that had been, as you put it, promoted out, realized we're facing things in our business we've never had to face before. And so a lot of them, if they were good, rolled up their sleeves and got back in the business and said, how do I get back to the tactical? Right. How do I look at what our business needs? How do I look at what our employees need? How do I look at what our customers need and make those changes and adjustments? And the organizations that made those changes and adjustments are still here and they're strong.
Correct.
Those that didn't, they struggled or they failed.
Or they're continuing to struggle right now and are on the verge.
And the other thing that I'll add is then we saw the other trend, and that is as organizations were coming out of all of the strict impact or significant impact of the pandemic, you had leaders that were forgetting how to get back into the strategic part of it, and they were still stuck in the tactical. And so I think right now you're seeing a lot of businesses that their horizon isn't as far as it used to be because they're really just looking at the tactical piece. And there's great opportunity moving forward for them to kind of roll their sleeves down a little bit and say, okay, I'm going to empower again the people that I had empowered before. That middle level leadership to say, I don't need to run it anymore. I'm going to go back and look at the 5-year horizon or the 3-year horizon, and you're going to come back into that role. But until you get headcount, which is a real challenge, you may still have kind of that middle level of leadership that's kind of doing dual, where one day they're rolling up their sleeves and diving into it, and the other day they're back to kind of leading and nurturing and growing their people and their divisions. I think we're to the last one. Well, the strategy 9, and then we've got a bonus one. Strategy 9 is employee communications, and this one really it's all encompassing. I talked about it earlier today. we hire great people. You know, a lot of times we say our people are our greatest competitive advantage. Well, I wouldn't go that far, because I think your competitors are probably also hiring great people, right? Like,
probably from you.
Yeah, right. In today's market, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
But what are we doing after we hire them? And when we leave employees in the dark, when we leave employees where they're not able to really engage and put in their all, we're missing out, as I mentioned earlier, on that full potential.
Yeah.
You know, where we can get the most out of them, and our organization can get the most out of them, and our organization can get the most out of itself. And so, you know, when it comes to employee communication, it's how are we communicating? How often are we communicating? And what are we communicating?
Yeah.
Are we only focused on business results, or are we only focused on calling out the problems and saying this needs to fix, this needs to fix? Or are we saying, you know, here's our values. Here's opportunities for growth. Here's an opportunity that we want to give a shout out that Susie did a great job, or Tom did a great job, and they really lived out our value and highlighted this, and we want to call that out and recognize them. What are we communicating is just as critical as to how and when.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of organizations, this was a big struggle in the early years of the pandemic, if we're far enough along to say early years. But when it really kicked off and we started having to communicate different and work different, what we communicated was different, how we communicated was different. And I think it's just a good opportunity to kind of step back and say, what is the message? How are we getting it out there? How often are we getting it out there? And then listening.
Yeah.
And I think that's also another piece of communication. We often just think it's top down.
Yeah, very well said.
We can learn so much. And I'm sure, like you said, we're preaching to the choir. I'm sure the choir's like, I couldn't sing any louder. Like, somebody hear my praises.
Well, but for our leaders too, making sure that those conversations that you have are conversations. You know, staff meetings should not be me telling my staff everything. You know, it should be providing time, because you can do that in an email. You can do that in other ways.
Yes.
You know, save that face time for that opportunity for a dialogue to occur.
And what great opportunity to get the insights that you don't have access to.
Yeah.
When you're in the ivory tower and you're a C-suite of a few that are so far removed from the customer, you miss out on so many opportunities. And that plays the whole way down. Right?
Yeah.
There will always be more frontline employees than there are managers, middle managers. There'll always be more middle managers than there are executives, more executives than all the way up, right? There will always be that ratio. And we miss out on the learning that can happen, like you said, in those conversations where you can say, hey, I have some thoughts, but I want to bring up a challenge that we're seeing and just see what you guys think about it.
Well said.
And listening and letting your people know that you're willing to listen. That doesn't mean you have to do it, but you may be able to fine-tune your plan based on the feedback you were able to gather from your people.
So you got a bonus.
Yeah, I've got a bonus.
There you go.
So in the book, Taking Care of Your People, there's a 10th strategy, and it's faith at work, faith and optimism, and really I'll touch on just the 3 bullet points that I think accentuate it, and it's an entrepreneurial faith. And it's an entrepreneurial faith that, as is described, it's a rush of unexplainable optimism about the future that's motivated by more than just a personal desire for wealth. And that's a lot of words, but if you kind of slow that down and think about it, it's optimism and excitement to do something more than just make money. We are a mission-driven organization. We help businesses succeed so communities prosper. It's large. It can mean so many different things. But I think when you unite people behind a greater purpose, you're gonna get through the harder times easier, and you're gonna get more out of them in the good times.
Well, and it's such important in a healthcare organization. That's exactly what we do. I mean, it's a natural for us.
Yeah, it goes on then to say too, there's something else that electrifies the dream and churns inside the dreamer. The tantalizing prospect of creating something from nothing en route to building an enterprise.
I love it.
And again, I think that's even just a fraction of the way we could capture, like you said, when you are intrinsically motivated, when there is a passion and a love for what you do, you'll give it your all. but that can quickly be killed. And so, you have to be mindful. It goes back to the leadership. It goes back to how you're maximizing your people, how you're minimizing risks, how you're streamlining. They are so interrelated that one can relieve the other and impact or emphasize another. And so when you're really thinking about those three areas and how they interplay together, you have a great opportunity to increase and build that hope. And that's really what this is saying is, how are you playing into that? How are you being mindful of that? How are you being purposeful? Are you nurturing hope and gaining confidence in your product, in your people, in your organization? Do you have a resolve and a determination to push through distractions and limitations? And businesses, I think, over the last couple of years, really found a lot of distractions. And those that had that resolve, had that entrepreneurial spirit and faith, I think they moved through. Not necessarily unscathed, but they could take their strikes, they could take their beatings, and they could rise up above it. And they're stronger and better for it. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll take a breath.
I know, and we're running out of time here, unfortunately. But
we just talk about, you should be ready for the next pandemic, whatever it is. Right? If you didn't learn from this, then you didn't do your job. We should be ready for how we communicate, how we motivate, how we inspire, how we stop and listen to people, how we work to encourage them and build on them. And if we aren't able to do that, then we missed a great opportunity that's a silver lining in what's been a lot of challenging times over the last couple of years.
So in our last couple minutes here, can you quickly just talk about the advantages of using a PEO?
And you'll see quickly, I'm not a salesperson at this point, but I really think that if you have a dedicated HR staff, they would probably tell you a lot of their time is wasted on doing just the trivial, doing the tactical, making sure that payrolls are run or time offs are processed or timesheets are processed, and it's really administrative. You are missing out on the opportunity to really build a comprehensive human capital strategy. Now, in our organization, we focus on that. That's one of the things we help with is that. But I think even if you've got dedicated HR people, they probably have those skills. And we can take a lot of the mundane, the processes, and streamline those and give you access to better benefits, better systems, better tools. And particularly, I'll give a disclaimer to why ours over someone else. We really were built on a service model. So where others will tout an advantage of streamlined systems and processes and technologies, well, what happens when the technology goes down? What happens when the system breaks? You're really left.
What happens when you have a turnover?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, especially during the pandemic, we lost a lot of. In our own company, we've gone through 3 human resources people in the last 9 months. Yeah. So that's probably one of the biggest advantages that you would have. You wouldn't have that problem.
There is someone at the other end of the phone based on whatever challenge you need, or just our general liaison, right? That's going to say, I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you when you're struggling to hire. I'm going to help you when you're struggling to grow and train. I'm going to help you when you're struggling to let someone go. I'm going to be there to help minimize your risks, to help maximize your people, and help streamline your processes. And I think when you turn a lot of your non-core business activities over to someone who specializes in it, it frees up your resources and your abilities to focus really on the core of what your business does. And that's what we do. We help companies run better, grow faster, and make more money by helping to really allow them to leverage their core strengths.
And I think that's where we're going to have to end it.
Awesome.
It's been great. I so much enjoyed this, and I think our listeners got a lot out of it. So thanks for your time.
I appreciate this opportunity, and it's great getting to meet with you and work with you.
Absolutely.
In this segment, we provide an update on upcoming topics for the podcast, our upcoming virtual conferences, and upcoming speaking engagements for John and his staff, and other events in the ASC industry.
So we talked about in the beginning section here, the August 2022 Administrator Boot Camp starts on August 30th, 4 days virtually with mentoring. And then the week after that, Sue, I'm heading down to the Hyatt Regency in Indian Wells Resort, where I hear it's like 120 degrees. During the day. I can't wait for that.
For the California Conference, right?
For the California Ambulatory Surgery Association Conference and exhibits. That's September 7th through the 9th. And as I said, it's at the Hyatt Regency Indian Wells Resort and Spa in Indian Wells, California. And I'll be doing a finance boot camp on the first day of the conference.
And September 15th and 16th is the ASC Finance, Accounting, and Reimbursement Seminar, which is virtual with Christina Benton of Coding Compliance Management.
And please don't forget about all of our recorded events, and they're all available at ascpodcast.com, which includes our credentialing conference, the Fall 2021 Finance and Accounting Conference, a great Conditions for Coverage conference if you really want to learn everything about conditions for coverage. And Sue, we're going to have to do that one again soon because, of course, the changes in the conditions for coverage and the interpreted guidelines. The Medical Director Conference that we recorded in 2021, we're working on a 2022 Medical Director Conference, and that hopefully will be announced shortly. And then we do have self-paced versions of both our Administrator Boot Camp and our Director of Nursing Boot Camp if you just don't have the time to be able to dedicate 4 days to the boot camp. And we do always want to remind everyone to consider becoming a patron member of the podcast. That helps to support this podcast and gives you great benefits like being able to log in on Saturday mornings and talk to us. And membership helps to defray the cost of producing the podcast, including research staff, travel costs to conferences, equipment costs, and production costs. For more information, visit ASCPodcast.com. That's it for this episode of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle. And please spread the word about our podcast with your friends and colleagues, and do us the honor of hitting the subscribe button. And also, we have set up a ASC Podcast with John Goehle LinkedIn account. So look us up there as we have a group now for the ASC Podcast with John Goehle. Just ask to become a member. We're accepting anybody that is interested, and that's a good way of keeping in touch with other people that have similar interests to you. The sound editor for this episode is Susan Cronkite. Executive producer is John Goehle. Research assistance is provided by Susan Cronkite, Jenna Alvarez, Judy D'Ambrosio, Alex Borneman, Zach Calritis, Amy Durbano, Lori Rodricks, and Ann Geyer. Music is provided by Media Sushi and Mike Noah. And the ASC Podcast with John Goehle is hosted on Podbean and is available on all major podcast channels.
This episode of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle is sponsored by Surgical Information Systems, Trivalence, and Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies. Surgical Information Systems provides cutting-edge information solutions for surgery providers. Trivalence offers a comprehensive next-generation ASC solution that optimizes payment and supply chain performance, enabling actionable insights. Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies is the nation's leading regulatory and accreditation compliance resource for ambulatory surgery centers. For more information about our sponsors, visit our website at ascpodcast.com. This podcast is an educational and operational tool and is not intended to be a comprehensive resource for all rules, regulations, and standards that an ambulatory surgery center must meet. The advice provided should not be considered as, nor does it constitute, legal advice or opinion. When reviewing specific situations involving legal and regulatory issues, attorneys and other professionals should be consulted. This has been a production of Eden Group Development. All rights are reserved. If you are interested in advertising or sponsoring the ASC Podcast with John Goehle, please email us at info@ascpodcast.com. We would love to hear your questions and comments. Please email us at comments@ascpodcast.com.